If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to check out my new website, truehorrorgame.com, and my app True Horror in both the iOS and Android store. It's a choose-your-own-adventure narrated horror game. I'll leave the link below. Now enjoy the show and hit that like button. One summer, a friend and I took a trip to the United States. We were both Irish guys in our early 20s with little money, taking Greyhounds and Amtrak from city to city. I was the more organized of the two. I looked after booking tickets and reservations, and when it came to hitting Chicago, I thought I'd struck gold by finding a room at the Hilton at a ridiculously affordable price. It seemed like a major upgrade on the lovable dumps we'd been staying in. But as soon as we got off the 20-hour train journey from New Orleans, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The hotel was in Addison, Illinois, not the Chicago neighborhood of Addison, where we'd been planning to stay. It was a blip on a map that, at the time, consisted of little more than a road sign, a petrol station, a White Castle, and our hotel, almost exclusively used by business execs. Luckily, the hotel offered a discount taxi service through a cab company that they were affiliated with and sent someone out to pick us up. This is where things took a turn. The guy shows up, pops the trunk, and just as we're putting our bags in, there was a roar from behind. "Hey, you can't take that cab. He has out-of-town plates. That's against the law." A burly cab was enraged by the fact that our driver had picked us up right in front of a queue of cabs awaiting customers. I got about 2 words into my explanation when our driver lunged for the guy, screaming, "You freaking idiot, I'll kill you. I have an iron pipe right here and I swear to God I'll beat you to death." Looking back, this is where we should have brought things to a halt. But the truth is, we didn't have enough money for a normal cab ride to somewhere far out of town. So being two awkward Irish guys, we just got in the car, gazed in the opposite direction, and hoped the matter would resolve itself. I'm not proud of that. After jumping back in the car, still cursing, the driver gunned it down the wrong side of the street at rush hour, evidently making up for lost time, while venting road rage in the direction of any honking horns. It smelled like he'd been drinking, but bailing out genuinely seemed like a terrible idea. At some point between claiming that he should have been a race car driver and calling us idiots for wearing seatbelts, he told us the story of how he recently beat the crap out of a customer who didn't tip him enough. In my head, I tried to play this off as just a slightly unnerving, if not terribly effective way of ensuring a handsome bonus, but the sight of my friend nervously counting a handful of sweat-soaked $1 bills gave me a sinking feeling. While I looked after booking the reservations, he was responsible for things like taxi fares. Between us, we had just enough cash to cover the fare before tip. This is where the implications escalated from vague threat to certain danger. The driver kept offering to show us his pipe, the same one he'd used to take care of the bad tipper. Despite our polite objections, he actually took the pipe out from under the seat, turning around to wave it at us with a maniacal laugh while the car sped on. I couldn't tell which was scarier, the feeling that we were about to crash at any minute or the looming confrontation when we would inevitably shortchange him. We were going so fast that the force of the wind coming through the open window took my breath away, intensifying the feeling of shock. Definitely the most distressing journey I have ever been on. Miraculously, the speeding had shaved valuable dollars off of the total, leaving just enough for the fare and a small tip. We had been saved by the very excess that had terrified us. I jumped out the moment we stopped, searched for help just in case things kicked off, but the driver seemed satisfied, gave us his card, and said to call him any time. He would be glad to drink whiskey and get into some fights with us. No thanks. Once we got to the safety of our hotel room, we just sat there, shaking, shell-shocked, trying to absorb what had just happened. A little bit of background. I was 16 years old when this happened, living in Amman City, the capital of Jordan in the Middle East. I was in high school. I used to weigh about 85 kilograms and was about 192 centimeters tall, and I was a calm but intimidating person if I wanted to be, but never really messed with anyone unless I was provoked to. I just got off of school and decided I wanted to go downtown because I was bored and didn't want to stay at home, and I wanted to get some DVDs and games to enjoy later. So I decided to take the bus as I wanted to save money, but I had to take a taxi to the bus stop, which was about less than 10 minutes by car. When I stopped the coming taxi, Inside the vehicle appeared a light-skinned man with black greasy hair, wearing a worn-out dark green shirt and a pair of jeans, who looked to be between the ages of 30 to 34, addressed me through the passenger window and asked, "Hey, where do you want to go?" I need to go to the bus stop that takes me downtown. It's only 10 minutes away." "Well, I can take you downtown if you like. I'm going to pass by that area. I can drop you there and you don't have to pay me." At this point, a red flag should have gone off in my head, but I thought that this man just wanted to be kind and I really didn't want to go through the hassle of taking more than one trip, so I decided to hop into his car and we would be on our way. Looking back on it now, this was a big mistake. Now there are different ways to head downtown and I only knew a couple of ways. As the man was driving, he started to take different routes that I have never seen before. Still no alarm bells starting to ring, as I only assumed he was taking a shortcut to get away from traffic. By this point, 20 minutes have passed and I begin to feel uneasy. Usually from the bus route I take, it only needs about 20 minutes to get downtown when there is little to no traffic, but I brushed it off once again. Then suddenly the man began to speak in his calm yet suspicious tone. "Hey, do you mind if I use your phone? I want to see if you have any videos or music I can send via Bluetooth." I found this to be a strange request, but seeing as the man was giving me a free ride, and the fact that I didn't have anything private in my phone, I handed it to him as I didn't want to be impolite and was just trying to break the awkward atmosphere. He played with the phone a little bit, but then proceeded to put my phone with his under the empty space of the driver's door handle. Doubt began circling my mind and I felt vulnerable without my phone. Yet despite all of this, I silenced my doubts and stared to the window outside. The feeling of dread and uneasiness only grew more as I was not able to make out where we were exactly anymore, as the man kept driving. I only started to see empty road with only desert on both right and left sides, with only a couple of old, worn-out, rusty shipping containers. It is getting darker at this point, and this is where things get even creepier. The man proceeds to pick up his phone and begins to speak to someone on the other end of the line, shouting the following with an angry voice. "I'm coming to mess you up, bro. You better prepare yourself as I'm coming to beat you up, you piece of crap." As soon as the man ended the phone call, I knew something was absolutely wrong. Looking more closely at the phone he was holding, I was able to recognize that the phone he had was the type of phone that doesn't have Bluetooth. Alarm bells started ringing loudly in my head. The whole call came out of nowhere, and I could feel a dread, and the fear was absolutely real. I asked him for my phone, growing nervous and impatient with each word escaping my mouth. He looked at me with a strange and annoyed look and said, "I just wanted to see what you got on your phone." By this point, I had enough and I sternly told him to give me my phone, the anger and fear barely contained in my voice. He hesitantly obliged after muttering back and forth, and I just knew I had to get out of this car. Feeling a rush of adrenaline, I decided to pretend I was talking to my parents, and I created a scenario where there was an emergency and I had to get back. So I began telling the man that I needed to return back immediately and told him to drop me off right here, right now. As I was seeing an upcoming traffic light, I knew that this was my only chance of escape. I was not sticking around any longer to figure out where this man was taking me. As soon as the man stopped at the traffic light, I spoke to him in my most intimidating voice to open the passenger door. Luckily, there was a couple of cars that stopped next to us, and thank God the man responded with a menacing look and pressed the unlock button. I got out of that car faster than I realized and went straight to a small coffee shop in the middle of nowhere as the taxi sped off. I went inside and asked the server if the downtown was close by, out of breath with sweat dripping from my forehead. The server looked at me with a confused yet irritated face and said, "You know you're out of the capital, right? Heading to the city of Zarka." Wow, I thought, as I proceeded to call my parents to pick me up from the middle of nowhere. God knows I am not taking a taxi to get back home, or anytime soon. Thinking back on it, the man planned on kidnapping me from the start, trying to take away my phone so I could not call for help, and proceeded to pretend he was having a fight with someone on the phone to secretly message his buddies that he was close by. For the past couple of days after reading some stories, I remembered something that happened to me back when I was 19 years old. When I was 19, I was working at an Italian restaurant which was a 10 to 15 minute walk from my house. Usually I'd walk there, but if I was running late, I'd call a cab. On one particular day, I called a cab company and this man picked me up. He was a short, balding, 50-something-year-old. He made conversation and we spoke for a bit while he drove me to work, which took no more than 5 minutes. He charged me a reduced fee and gave me his card, and told me that if I ever needed a ride to or from work, to just call his phone and he'll get me. Over the next 2 to 3 months, I'd call him and he'd pick me up to take me to and from work. Sometimes my mother would even call and use his services because I told her he was very nice and charged a lot less than a regular cab. But of course nothing can ever be nice and innocent. The next few times he'd pick me up, he'd tell me how beautiful I was and that he wishes he had a wife like me, blah blah. I just did that, fake laugh anytime he'd say it, and I didn't think anything more of it. Before we get to the next part, I know that I was incredibly stupid for allowing this to happen, and I've learned my lesson. But one night at around 6 to 7 p.m., he picked me up from work and said he was hungry and that we should go out to dinner. I told him no, it's okay, I'd rather just go home. Instead, he gets right on the highway the opposite way to my house, saying that we're going out to dinner. I'm internally freaking out. I text my friend and let her know what's going on. I did not want to text my mom because I irrationally assumed she'd be angry at me for some reason. He pulls up to a Thai restaurant that's in a little strip mall area, and I'm like, okay, maybe his intentions aren't bad. It's okay, so I actually go and have dinner with him. Yes, I know that was stupid. After dinner, he hands me $100 and tells me to go buy something nice, while he buys a button-down at some Banana Republic store. At this point, I'm just like, what? When he comes back out, I hand him his money back and demand he take me back home, and he obliges. It's a really awkward ride because all he's talking about is how pretty he thinks I am and how he really wants a kiss from me, how he envisions a woman like me being his wife. As he pulls up to my house, he asks if my parents are home. All the lights were off, but I said yes immediately, and he seemed to buy it. Not before asking me for a kiss, though. I said no thanks, and he tries to pull my face into his, and I pushed him off and ran into my house. I never told my mom about this, but I did call the cab company and spoke to a manager, who my mom happened to be friends with and made promise not to tell her, who told me that this wasn't the first time that something like this had happened and that he would be taking care of it. I got calls from this man a couple of times after this incident, but they stopped after I changed my number. Luckily, nothing more severe happened, but that was creepy enough for me, and I know I should have demanded for him to take me home as soon as he hopped on the highway. So this morning I got a cab from a local cab office. They're a big chain, which I had pre-booked in advance the night before. Got in the car, all good. I noticed the driver checked me out strangely through the rearview mirror, but didn't think much of it. We start driving. Now, my work is about 40 minutes away by car, and the route can be along some winding roads. However, 15 minutes into the trip, I realize we are actually still not far from my home. It's like we've been going in circles. Concerned, I check the maps on my mobile, and eventually I can see that by the looks of it, we were going towards some big road, in a wrong direction, but still towards that road. So I thought, okay, he'll just take it and we'll follow it towards my work. When we approach the road, the driver turns in the opposite direction to my work. We're already quite far from it, but we should be halfway there by now. I can see he has a GPS with my work address on it, but it doesn't look like he is following it. Straight away I ask him, why are we going in the opposite direction? Him in a flat voice, is it not the right direction? Me, no, it's the opposite direction. But that is what my GPS is telling me. Well, it's telling you wrong. Okay, let me try to Google Maps on my mobile. Fiddles with the mobile but stops halfway and is not doing anything, and carries on driving. So what's happening now? Here I don't really remember what he replied with, but I was starting to feel a bit faint. I mean, can you just stop the car and check the directions? Him, looking in the rearview mirror. Yeah, I will. He does not stop and carries on driving. Me feeling like I'm in a really bad dream, I begin to shout for him to stop the car. He stopped the car, and as I was getting out of it, he didn't utter a word. I jumped out in the middle of the road and in the middle of nowhere. Granted, it wasn't the middle of the night, but still I was so shaken that I just walked for a while, and it took me about 10 minutes to remember about things like Citymapper and Uber. That Uber driver wasn't very nice either, as in my state of derealization I still feel like it was a bad dream and something bad would happen again. I couldn't stop looking at the maps as we were moving. Now I wondered to myself, was I unreasonable? Was the cab driver probably a freak who doesn't know how to drive in London and how to communicate with people? If so, whatever. It shook me badly enough to consider this a traumatizing experience. But what do you guys think? So a little backstory first. I lived in Thailand from ages 13 to 17 as a missionary kid. My parents never really let me travel by myself unless it was necessary. We didn't have a car or anything, so I would use public transportation. Being a young blonde white girl in Bangkok, Thailand, where human trafficking is very prominent, I usually wasn't traveling by myself anyways. On this particular occasion, I was out at a mall with some friends and was going to go home. It was around dusk, so I was going to take a taxi. I've taken taxis before and haven't had any weird experiences until this time. When I get in, the guy was asking me questions like where I'm from and what do your parents do. They usually ask these sorts of things because I speak the language a bit and they're curious like anyone else would be. But this guy starts asking me very personal questions like how old I am, do I have a boyfriend, and are your parents home? I immediately start to become uncomfortable. I give him a false name and age and say that my parents were home. This is not where it stops. He continues to ask questions, now smiling creepily at me in the rearview mirror. I start to ignore him and just look out the window. After a minute of silence, he starts to hum. Not just humming to himself, but staring at me from the mirror. I wait a couple of minutes and have my phone in my hand ready to call someone if he makes a different turn. I knew most of the paths to my house, so I would know if he was taking a wrong turn. I also start memorizing his taxi number, color, and what his face looked like. He eventually starts full-on singing to me a slow song that I could not understand. I finally call my parents and just say to stay on the phone with me. The guy realizes I'm on the phone and stops immediately and doesn't look at me for the rest of the trip. I told him to drop me off a block away from my house just so he wouldn't know where I lived. I've never gotten out of a taxi so fast. I realized he could have been harmless and not intending to be creepy with his singing to me, but it was weird and I wasn't going to take any chances. This happened when I was 10. It was summer break and my family was on vacation in Italy. It was a pretty good vacation. The night right before we were going to leave, it was late, so my parents had a taxi pick us up. The man that picked us up was very short and small and kind of looked creepy from what I can remember. He picked us up and made small talk like any other taxi driver might. Eventually he asked us how our vacation was and when we were leaving. My parents told him that we were leaving at 5:30 in the morning the next day. He dropped us off at the hotel and my parents paid him. The hotel already provides a taxi driver for whatever reason, so they set us up. We went to bed thinking the morning would be normal. We awoke and were prepared to go when the guy from the night before was also there. He tried to force us to get in his car, but we got into the hotel taxi. He was following us, cursing. I became very scared when he started throwing stones at the car from behind. One even shattered the window. I remember thinking, why does this guy have stones in his car? We were in the middle of an empty road when the driver of the hotel taxi pulled over and threatened to call the police. The man quickly sped away. We arrived safely and paid the man extra. Not sure what that creep's intentions were, but they clearly were not good. I had a brilliant childhood at my grandparents' house. They had a large stately home in the English countryside. They owned around 80 acres of lush greenland, which included an old timber yard at the back of the house that was rented out to various tenants for various different reasons. I'd spend hours running around, exploring and visiting the chickens and horses at the back of the timber yard, accompanied by my beautiful, natured, now past grandfather. One day I was keenly steaming ahead of my younger brother and granddad, who weren't far behind, to get to the horse's pen. I was approached by this taxi driver guy who I'd seen conversing with my granddad a fair few times along with the bloke who owned the animals on my granddad's land. I vaguely remember some questioning regarding who I was with, where I was going, etc. At this point, I remember him asking whether I would like to come down to the farm and field with him to see the horses, not the horses on my granddad's land. I sat in the front seat of his taxi after stupidly accepting. Naive 7-year-old me wanted to see the animals. He began to drive away, and I remember seeing my grandfather literally sprinting towards the car. He opened the door, unbuckled me, and whisked me out with his massive hands and arms. My memory is patchy and vague from this point on. My dad had since told me that himself, my uncle, and my grandfather had it out with the taxi man big time for almost stealing me away. This is the same taxi man who was very friendly with this dodgy, suspected sex offender in our area. This guy always has different young boys in his car, and I was always told to stay away from him as something just isn't right. I'm 21 years old now, and this memory makes my skin crawl. I'd hate to think what could have happened. Back in 2005, I was 20 at the time. Young and foolish me decided to move to Mexico City alone and try to make it as an artist. So as many of you know, between 2005 and 2009, crime really escalated in my country, especially those that were drug-related, as well as kidnappings and muggings. I took a job at a call center to pay for my expenses while I studied. I was breaking even, but the hours were flexible, which allowed me to study part-time, and I was usually leaving downtown where I worked at around 10 to 11 p.m. most days. One night I was extremely tired and decided to board the first taxi I saw. Yeah, my bad. It seemed official enough, and after checking it out a bit, I decided to get in. But once I was in it, something just seemed off. You know how sometimes you just feel this weird sensation in your stomach telling you that there is something not quite right, but you can't figure out what it is? I felt that, but unfortunately I didn't get out. Not 10 minutes had passed when the driver started slowly down and came to a complete stop in the middle of a dark road without saying anything. I was sitting almost in the middle of the back seat when I heard the right side doors of the car open. 2 men boarded, one in the front and one in the back, pushing me to the side until I was exactly behind the driver. Time seemed to stand still for a minute that felt like forever, and even though life didn't flash before my eyes in a traditional sense, I could only think of my parents, and I wondered if this was the way I was going to die. And then the man next to me spoke. "Keep your eyes closed. We are not robbers or kidnappers." Great, I thought. Scout's honor. Then he proceeds to tell me a slightly elaborate yet completely ridiculous and implausible story of why they boarded my taxi. "We're running away from the car that is behind us. You can open your eyes for a second and see. Do you see? Just keep still and it will be over soon. We're not bad people. We will drop you near where you live. We just need help." Even though I was sure that the taxi driver was part of this scheme, they verbally mistreated him and asked him to shut up and keep driving, though he remained silent and calm the whole way. The guy next to me then just hilariously contradicts himself when he started searching my backpack. He also did a body search and checked my pockets, took out my wallet and called me by name. I never knew I could hate the sound of my name that much. The guy kept searching, so I raised my hands to show him that I didn't have anything else. The guy in the front seat was a different story. He sounded incredibly jumpy and agitated, maybe on drugs. I wasn't crying, screaming, or making any noise. When I raised my hand, he unnecessarily yelled at me to keep my hands down. "What do you think I'm about to do? Karate chop all 3 of you and jump out of a moving car?" I thought. The guy next to me sensed the tension and exclaimed, "So, just try to remain calm. I'm sorry, you seem cool, but things are hard. In any other circumstance, we would be friends." I almost chuckled. "I don't condone your lifestyle, but I don't judge," I said. But as he was keeping my belongings, which included my old LG cell phone, I couldn't help but think of the irony of how he, my new best buddy, just couldn't ask for my number as he was stealing my phone. More time passed, and front door guy was unfortunately now in possession of my debit card. How do I know, you ask? Because he yelled, "Tell us your PIN and give us the right one or else I'll hurt you." I don't know what came over me because my response was, "Don't talk to me like that." It baffles me that in a moment of extreme danger where my life was literally on the line, the fact that someone was being rude to me was what bothered me the most. Hey, you can be a killer or robber. please have some manners?" "Yeah, man, don't talk to her like that," the guy next to me said. While they were now apparently playing good cop, bad cop, I proceeded to give them my PIN code, and the jumpy minion got out of the car and took out the money. It wasn't a lot of money, but hey, I worked hard for it, so it still sucks, of course. Typically in express kidnapping cases, they drive you around for hours until it's midnight and time to get the rest of the money on your debit or credit card. I didn't have much to begin with, so thankfully they seemed to be ready to drop me off. I knew at that point that they weren't going to kindly let me go near my place, which I feared for a second since they did have my wallet, but the human diapers actually dropped me on the opposite side almost 2 hours away. They gave me back my empty backpack, opened the door, and told me to slowly walk without turning around. And I just kept walking until I knew the car was far away, when I finally felt safe, and then I sat on the floor of a dark park and started crying, mostly because I was relieved. The next part was trying to get back to my apartment without any money, cards, or a cell phone. The only thing I could think of was to jump in front of a police car in the middle of a busy avenue. I wasn't exactly thinking straight at that moment, and they did stop, and one of them seemed aloof and fed up, like, oh, another girl that was robbed, hooray. Thankfully, the second police officer offered to switch to his personal car and drive me back to my apartment. As I was clearly in shock, he kept trying to make polite conversation about my hometown and what I did for a living. He even offered me some money, but I declined. I was truly thankful for what he did, and I regret not asking for his number so I could contact him afterward, bake him some cookies, I don't know. I just really hope he continues to have the amazing life he deserves. So total time kidnapped, about 3 to 4 hours, but it felt like so much more. I decided to move to a new city afterward, and my new city became extremely violent thanks to the drug war in 2007. But hey, even if I saw a couple of hangings and blood on the streets, I finished college without being kidnapped again, so I'll call that a win. At the time this incident took place, I was 19, very petite and overly trusting. I can tell you, being a 30-year-old mother of 2 now, I am haunted by the memory of that night. It all started on an extremely cold night in February in one of the coldest cities in Canada. My boyfriend at the time, Cameron, drove myself and a few friends to a bar in the downtown part of the city. Our relationship was always very dramatic, and alcohol tended to heighten the drama. As the evening got late, Cameron took more interest in another girl at the bar, and naturally I was angry. The gang decided to head on to an after-party since it was last call at the bar in around 1:45 a.m. I was far beyond my limit of vodka sodas and had no interest in going to another party with Cameron and the girl he was clearly into. We all got into the car and tensions rose as I demanded to be driven home. Cameron refused. He insisted on going to the party. The argument continued until I finally yelled at him to pull the car over and let me out. I was shocked when he did just that, and then proceeded to drive off and leave me downtown at 2 a.m. in the dead of winter in nothing but a dress, nylon socks, high heels, and a light winter dress coat. As I watched the car drive away, it occurred to me that he wasn't coming back. I began to call girlfriends looking for help to get home. No one answered. I had no money left in my purse for a taxi. Terrified to call my parents and tell them the story, they already disliked Cameron, I decided to start walking. The conditions were extreme for my wardrobe. My hands, legs, and feet ached from the cold. I sobbed as I walked down the empty streets. I was approximately 5 kilometers from my parents' residence. The temperature that night would have been in the range of -20 degrees Celsius or -4 Fahrenheit. I began to panic. I cried harder and the tears froze to my cheeks. Although the streets were quiet, I heard the sound of a vehicle approaching me from behind. I turned to see a middle-aged white man in an older model sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down and he asked me if I was all right. "Fine, thanks," I replied and kept walking. He proceeded to slowly follow and said, "Can I give you a ride? It's freezing out here and very dangerous for a young woman to be walking alone at this hour." I declined his help and continued walking. The man, who identified himself as Bill, continued to follow me and explained he had a daughter my age and would be terrified to know she was out here like this. Eventually, I did the unthinkable. I agreed to get in his car. Bill was a clean-cut man who looked to be in his late 40s. His vehicle was tidy, and at first glance he seemed very average. He began by asking where he could drive me to, and I directed him to my parents' affluent neighborhood, which was about a 10-minute drive. He began to tell me about his children, one boy and one girl, both teenaged. He explained that he had recently split up with his wife. "Do you want to know why we split up?" he asked me. I politely replied, "Sure, if you want to talk about it." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bill shifting. He had what appeared to be a winter coat over his lap. My stomach tightened and a wave of dread washed over me. He moved the coat over to reveal from the bottom down he was dressed in women's underwear, garters, thigh-high stockings, and high-heeled shoes. "I'm going to die tonight." Those words echoed in my mind. I realized Bill had been out looking for someone like me, and I feared the worst. No one would ever know what happened to me. Why hadn't I just called my parents, like parents they told me from day one never to get into a stranger's car? When I got older, they always urged me to call them if I was out somewhere and needed help. Why had I put myself in this situation? Bill continued to speak to me, snapping me out of my thoughts. My wife wasn't into this sort of thing. She told me it was sick and weird. I tried to stay calm. "Well, I think you should find someone who you can be yourself with, Bill," I told him. I tried to keep the conversation supportive. For the next few minutes, I was paralyzed with fear. He continued to tell me about his sexual fantasies as we drove. Finally, after what seemed like the longest drive of my life, he turned into my block. I told him to park a ways up so he didn't see which house was mine. He put the car in park and turned to me. "Now, I have something to ask you. Would you please give me one of your shoes? I'd like to smell it a while." I almost choked. "No, Bill, that would make me very uncomfortable," I told him. He sighed. "Well, I want something in return for helping you." He sounded irritated with me. "How about this? Go into your house and get me a pair of old shoes. I will take them as payment for the ride." Of course, I agreed. I practically burst out of the car, walked as fast as I could to the gate of the backyard. I scrambled to unlock the back door and locked it shut behind me. I hurried to the front windows and watched for him to follow me. He didn't. Eventually, he must have given up, and I saw the vehicle pull away. I had never been so relieved. I can't explain the desperation I must have been feeling that night. I've never done anything that crazy before. Here's where things get worse. The next morning, my friend Lily called me back, worried about all of the missed calls on her phone. I told her the whole story. She was silent for a moment. "Maggie, you won't believe this, but I heard that exact story before. A girl from work told us that a few months ago, and she's not very credible, so none of us believed her." So apparently, this was Bill's thing. My question is, did things escalate as time went on? Hey guys, thanks for listening. And be sure to check out my new Choose Your Own Adventure horror game on the iOS and Android App Store. There's over 10 different levels and stories for you to see if you can survive through. Let's see if you got what it takes. Links in the description. Thank you so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.